Let's talk about metacognition, self-monitoring, and self-awareness. How do these sorts of things relate, and what do they even mean? Researchers have said that self-awareness provides the information essential for conscious self-monitoring, otherwise called metacognition. Metacognition is a tool for consciously controlling your behavior and adjusting your experience on the world. It's essential for learning by conscious experience, not only within yourself, but importantly, also between individuals. Metacognition is thinking about thinking. What's going on in your mind? How can you assess that? How does it relate to yourself, others, people around you, the world at large? How does what's going on in here affect out there? And being aware of it becomes a really interesting task for people to self-regulate and monitor themselves. In essence, become more self-aware. People who are highly anxious tend to ruminate over and over again, which is to say they just focus on thoughts and considerations going over and over and over in their mind. Often this is related to something bad that's happened or something bad that might happen, and that's where rumination becomes quite distressing for somebody. But I've also seen in my own clinical practice, people who ruminate can be very highly informed about how they are, how their reactions impact other people, how other people's reactions impact them. They can see things that other people can't see. They can read people a whole lot better than your average person. And that's because they spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on and how relationships interact and how a person's posture and their facial expressions and their non-verbal communication impacts the way that they are assessed and presented in front of other people. And they're often doing this as a self-preservation strategy, because if they're able to find ways to anticipate any type of situation, they're better prepared for that situation. This is where anxiety can be a positive thing in some people's lives, because it initiates a sense of metacognitive awareness. Problem is, these people who are generally more anxious and thinking a whole lot more, ruminating, tend to be a whole lot more stressed. And they may overthink certain situations and over-prepare. They think about 1,000 different ways that a person may act in a situation, or how their actions impact other people in 1,000 different ways, and they can be highly sensitized to these situations. They may also feel a whole lot of body-based issues, so a lot of anxiety and stress and physical health issues that can be exacerbated by overthinking and being highly sensitized to your own body, which is to say that you're noticing a whole lot of stuff that's happening in here and over here, more so than other people are able to notice. So essentially, you've got to strike a balance. How do you strike that balance? That's a little bit difficult, because everyone's got a different response to that based on their own idiosyncratic actions, awareness, self-awareness, and even their past, present, and future. One helpful strategy can be what's called the STUN technique. STUN is an acronym that stands for stop. Ask yourself whether the thought that you're having is true, because oftentimes the thoughts that we have are neither true nor useful. And if they are true, they might not be useful, which brings us to the next letter. U is for useful. Is what you're saying to yourself useful in this current situation? And if it's not useful, what can you do? Well, you can come up with a new story, a new action, a new way of thinking. And this isn't wishful thinking. It's about assessing a situation and understanding, hey, is my thought about this person helping me right now? If it's not helping me right now, if it's not useful, and if it's not even true, do I have all the evidence that I can kind of sift through? And if you don't have that evidence, it's probably likely not to be true. And you've got to ask yourself, what do you do with that information? Do you act in a different way, a new way, a novel way than you would otherwise act? And this takes a step back. Instead of reacting, you're responding to the situation that's in front of you. And there is a real difference between reacting and responding. To react is often knee-jerk, whereas to respond to a situation, you've got a assessment and almost an objective or semi-unbiased assessment of a situation. Now, you rarely get, unless you have a double-blinded clinical trial that it assesses something in particular, you often don't have an objective view of a particular situation or an unbiased view. The reason why scientists put double-blinded studies where the researcher and the participant in the research are not aware of what they're taking into their bodies or what group they're in is because we have biases. We have confirmation bias, we have negativity biases, and we even have positivity biases depending on how we operate in the world. So it's important to take that step back, understand, have that metacognitive awareness where you think about certain things that you are thinking about. One of the most important strategies that I go to is what I've called objective self-awareness. Now, objective self-awareness is in vitro exposure to yourself. What does this look like? All right, so you're sitting here watching this video, learning a few new stuff. What if you could take some time to take a step back mentally and watch yourself sitting where you are or standing where you are, watching this video? How do you look like? What's your posture like? What is your facial expression? What are you feeling? If someone else were watching you right now, what would they see? Can you do this in the here and now? These are really important questions to improve that sense of self-awareness. And it takes a lot of practice to gain this objective self-awareness. And yet when we practice it often, we can tend to do it on the fly. For example, right now, as I'm sitting down, I can see myself from an external point of view talking to this particular camera that I'm talking into right now. I can see the facial expressions as they are projected on this camera, and I can see myself from an outsider's point of view. I can see myself as you are seeing me because I'm looking at a screen that is projecting my face right now. Now, often when people have Zoom meetings or that sort of stuff, some people use the cues of what they see on the camera to adjust their behavior and to adjust themselves. Either they're not happy with the way that they look, they turn off their camera or what have you. Or other people see, hey, I've got something that I don't want other people seeing, so I'm going to adjust that. I'm going to adjust my posture, I'm going to adjust my facial expression. So it's taking that concept where you're looking at yourself as somebody else could see you in the moment. It's kind of like what we saw Sartre or even Nietzsche to some extent, or even other psychologists who look at the concept of objective self-awareness, looking at yourself as an outsider would see you. Try it out. See how you're going. Do it in small bursts. Even looking at yourself in a mirror while you're doing something you want to change. Like you want to give up sweets. Try eating the sweets in front of the mirror and really focus on yourself. If you drink too much alcohol or use too many drugs, that's also another thing. You do it in front of a mirror, it provides another level of how you're seeing yourself. So these really, really useful strategies can impact and improve the sense that you have of who you are. Another related strategy is when you're upset, not writing or responding to a text or having a phone call when you're feeling really highly strung. So for example, you might have had the experience where you've been really angry, you've typed up a text and you're just about to press send and you're like, oh crap, I just want to get rid of all that. And that's a really important level of self-awareness. If you don't have a high level of self-awareness, you would just press send straight away and live with the consequences as they arise. What I would recommend and what I would kind of relate to what we're talking about so far is writing a text message when you're upset, taking a step back, doing something else for 5 minutes, and then returning back to that text, and then rereading and taking things out as you need to. People do that all the time when they're writing pictures or when they're doing a assignment or when they're at work, writing a story, what have you. It's re-editing the experience that you've put down on paper or the plan, proposal, that sort of stuff. Taking a step back, watching it and moving forward. That boosts self-awareness. Self-awareness increases self-regulation. Self-regulation is the cornerstone of self-control, which builds confidence. And that allows you to become a better version of who you are. Refer back to the previous course that I've done with academia on confidence. What researchers have found when we are looking at ourselves in these sorts of ways is we start to have a high level of self-regulation and emotional control. For example, people who are taught to recognize their own facial expressions have higher levels of emotional regulation in a study Ku and his colleagues in 2017. Now, what we need to consider is how this relates to our day-to-day life. If we are able to take a step back when we're feeling really highly strung, or when we're in an argument, or when we're just upset, can you take a step back and watch yourself as other people would be seeing you right now? And in doing so, what happens? What happens to your day-to-day expressions, your experiences, your emotions, that sort of stuff? You'll be surprised. From a clinical point of view, these types of exercises relate back to things like visualizing or mindfulness-based strategies, things like self-hypnosis, and modalities like acceptance and commitment therapy. For example, cognitive diffusion techniques, these sorts of things. Now, that might all sound like mumbo jumbo, but basically it's just taking a step back, watching yourself as you are saying something, experiencing something, and assessing it from an observer's point of view. Picking back up from a mindfulness perspective, what is mindfulness? How can we even understand the concept of mindfulness if you haven't really heard about it? The best way I've heard mindfulness defined is paying attention on purpose, without judgment, and with compassion. Kabat-Zinn was the Western originator of mindfulness-based strategies. In fact, he put together a mindfulness-based stress reduction protocol that is one of the most evidence-based techniques in the mindfulness world. King and his colleagues in 2011 found the following. Mindfulness brings about various positive psychological effects, including increased subjective well-being, reduced psychological symptoms and emotional reactivity, and improved behavioral regulation. It's a no-brainer. Mindfulness is an element of paying attention on purpose, and the object of that attention is really important. But the non-judgmental element is prime over here. So as you watch yourself, try to see yourself from an observer's point of view without necessarily negatively judging or shaming yourself. And you'll see what happens as you do that. You become more and more objective. Journaling is another interesting strategy that can help with regulating yourself and observing yourself from an outsider's point of view. Except the thing is, you're the one who's doing the observation on yourself. One research study randomly assigned 122 college students into 3 writing conditions. One that focused on emotions relating to a trauma or stressor, another that focused on cognitions, so thoughts and emotions relating to a trauma or stressor, and another writing factually about various media events. What the researchers observed was that those focusing on cognitions and emotions developed greater awareness of the positive benefits of the stressful events that they were focusing on, much more than the other 2 groups. And this effect was apparently mediated by greater cognitive processing during writing. Now, what does that even mean? In order for your brain to regulate itself, to be more aware, and to move forward in confidence and high levels of esteem, it needs not to act in a very reactive, stressed out way. When you're using your very executive functioning, which is kind of like that purposeful thought that is required for you to feel regulated and there in the moment observing yourself, you have a higher level of processing from a higher region of your brain, in particular the prefrontal cortex, which is often responsible for focused, regulated behavior. This is what journaling does. It tells you to sit down, put pen to paper, and work forward into a better sense of regulation by writing out what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. So if you want to start taking up a practice of journaling, it's really important to notice how writing certain things out, how you're feeling, becomes a way of regulating your body and then making plans on how you might address that in the future. Never leave it as I'm just going to write down all my emotions. You've got to write down your thoughts of the emotions as well and notice what it is that they and how it is that they relate to your plans moving forward. These sorts of things really work. Other researchers have found that journaling was an effective intervention for mitigating mental distress, increasing well-being, and enhancing physical functioning among medical populations. So from a medical point of view, journaling also helps you heal better. That's a huge, huge deal. What about another strategy? I really encourage this one. We've talked about it before, but asking other people what they think of how it is that you are, and asking other people's opinions in an open-minded way. 2005, a neuroscientist was working hard on a study on psychopathy. It was trying to figure out how psychopathic brains worked, and he was also doing another side study on Alzheimer's disease. And in the process, what he did was he collected a whole range of brain scans, and he reached out to his family members as well to be the control group for the Alzheimer's study, just to notice how a normal brain, quote unquote, looked like, and then comparing them to Alzheimer's brains and kind of assessing that sort of stuff. One day when he was organizing these scans, he came across one scan that looked really odd in the pile that was supposed to be the Alzheimer's brains. When looking at it, it looked very much like a psychopathic brain. In my interview with this neuroscientist, this is what he said.
And nobody had ever really come up with a full comprehensive sort of view of what would be the psychopath pattern. Not what's the pattern of a murderer or killer, what's the psychopath pattern. And so I analyzed those, and they fit into really neat groups of, there was a whole group that was the impulsive murderers. Then there was the disorganized ones that had brain damage, get hit in the head with a hammer, a lot of drugs. But then there were these other cases that were clearly different. I had a pile, though, the final pile of those on my desk in the office at that time. This is 2005. So I've got those there. And now the two technicians come into my office with this different set of scans having to do with Alzheimer's, had nothing to do with psychopathy. So when I looked through these, I went through the pile of my family scans. I quickly went through because I've seen so many of these scans for all sorts of disorders, right, over the years. And I looked through, and I got through almost the entire pile, and they looked grossly normal. I was really happy about this. None of them looked like there was any problem. And certainly not an Alzheimer's problem. And it was great. I said, my God, probably my wife, I didn't know the names of the people, but all of them were fine. I got to the last, scan at the bottom of the pile, and I looked at it, and I said, and I looked up at the technicians. I said, okay, this is really funny. All right, you slipped in one of the murderers, right? I said, because whoever this cat is, should not be walking around in open society. Because it was so pathological. And it didn't have any other problems, but it had no activity in the ventromedial and orbital cortex, at the base of the frontal lobe, nothing in the anterior medial temporal lobe. The amygdala was kind of a speckled hot and cold. The anterior insula had a weird pattern for, the type of empathy that you would find in somebody with psychopathy. Now, it's not people have that pattern have psychopathy, but that's the trait, and it was consistent with that. So I just laughed, and I said, guys, this is very funny. Okay. They go, no, this is really one of your family. I said, you gotta be kidding. And so that's when I had to pull the tape off to see what it was. And of course, that's when Gandalf showed up at my door, and it was me. I was it. And so that's when the shit hit the fan. Well, when I saw it, I just laughed. I just laughed, and I said, well, my theory must be wrong, obviously, because I'm okay. I'm a perfectly normal person. This can't be the right pattern. So as a scientist, I just said, it's not that I have psychopathy. It's that this pattern that I discovered was not the right one, because it couldn't be me. That was my response. And I kind of blew it off when some of the psychiatrists I work with, right, and who know me and looked at this, they said, this is really pathological. I said, what do you think about that? I said, I don't give a shit. And one of them said, that's your problem. You really don't care. And I didn't. I don't. But the same week, at the end of that week, I went back and I mentioned it to my wife. I said, Dee, I said, I had the weirdest kind of odd experience here. My PET scan was completely pathological. I said, I looked like the worst of the murderers I had seen who were psychopaths. And she said something really with a straight face. She goes, it doesn't surprise me. That was, that was a curious thing because I've known her forever. I know when she's kidding and not kidding. She was not kidding, but I still blew it off. It wasn't until later I went back and started really asking people. I started with my wife and I said, tell me what you really think of me. Don't pull any punches because people won't tell you what they think of you. Either they're scared of you, especially if they think I'm really nuts, or I'm a psychopath. Don't poke the bear, right? It's like, but I said, no. And I started with her and she told me what she really thought of me and what I've done and over the years. And then I went to my kids, my brothers, and then to the psychiatrist I know. And they all say the same thing. They said, basically, and the clinician said, you're probably borderline. Actually, you're not a full clinical categorical psychopath, but you're right on the border. And after spending a lot of time with them and with the psychoanalysis and the full analysis, it was the summary was that what one of them said and the other agreed with, the clinician, that here's a person who has all the urges and thoughts, dreams, everything of a full-blown psychopath. He just simply doesn't act them out.
So basically what we have is asking questions, finding out a little bit more about yourself, and working forward to understand how this relates to you as a person and how this relates to how you see yourself. Essentially, there are so many other ways. I'm sure you've found other ways to ask yourself questions, to monitor your own behavior, and to increase your self-awareness as a result. What I've shown you today, hopefully, is just another element of a research-based, psychology-driven, neuroscientific-based understanding of increasing self-awareness from our point of view, from a clinical point of view. I hope you've enjoyed this course. And if you can do anything, just apply some of these learnings to your day-to-day. Try some of these exercises out and work with them. I guarantee you they will change your life if you've done them often enough.